When Julius Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March in 44 BCE, his killers thought they were saving the Republic. They thought that by removing the tyrant, everything would just go back to normal. What they didn't count on was that Caesar had friends, really powerful friends, and those friends were not going to let this slide. In the immediate aftermath of the assassination, Rome was in chaos. The conspirators, led by Brutus and Cassius, barricaded themselves on the Capitoline Hill, terrified that Caesar's veterans would tear them apart. Mark Antony, who had been Caesar's right-hand man, seized control of Caesar's will and his war chest. And then there was this 18-year-old kid named Gaius Octavius, Caesar's great-nephew, who was studying in Greece when he got the news. Caesar had adopted him in his will. This kid would eventually become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, but at this point he was just a teenager with a famous name and absolutely no political experience. The Senate, trying to keep the peace, granted amnesty to all of the conspirators. Brutus and Cassius were even given provincial governorships to get them out of Rome. But Mark Antony wasn't done. He gave this absolutely devastating speech at Caesar's funeral, where he read out Caesar's will, which left money to every citizen of Rome, and displayed Caesar's bloody toga to the crowd. The people of Rome went absolutely berserk. They tried to burn down the houses of the conspirators. Brutus and Cassius had to flee the city for their lives. Meanwhile, young Octavian, we'll call him Octavian for now, even though he would later take the name Augustus, arrived in Rome and immediately started causing problems. He demanded his inheritance. He started calling himself Caesar, which really annoyed Mark Antony, who saw himself as Caesar's true political heir. Octavian began recruiting Caesar's veterans, paying them out of his own pocket. Mark Antony thought this kid was a joke. He would soon learn otherwise. For about a year and a half, there was this incredibly messy power struggle in Rome. Mark Antony tried to consolidate power. Octavian built up his own army. The Senate, seeing an opportunity, tried to play them against each other. They sent Octavian and both of the consuls to fight Mark Antony, who had taken control of Cisalpine Gaul. In the battle, both consuls died, Mark Antony was defeated and fled, and Octavian was left in command of a massive army. He was 19 years old. Octavian marched on Rome, another one of those, and forced the Senate to make him consul. Then, in a move that shocked everybody, he made peace with Mark Antony. They met with Lepidus, another one of Caesar's former generals, and formed what we now call the Second Triumvirate. Unlike the first one with Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, which was an unofficial alliance, this one was actually legally sanctioned. The three of them were given dictatorial powers for 5 years to restore the Republic. Sure guys, that's definitely what you're going to do. The first thing they did was compile a list of their enemies. We call these proscription lists, and they're exactly as bad as they sound. If your name was on the list, you were declared an enemy of the state, your property was confiscated, and anyone could kill you for a reward. It was basically state-sanctioned murder, and it was how they funded their upcoming war. Thousands of people died, including Cicero, our guy from the previous story. Mark Antony really had it out for him. They cut off his head and his hands and nailed them to the speaker's platform in the forum. Cicero had used those hands to write speeches against Mark Antony and that voice to deliver them. The symbolism was pretty clear. While all of this was happening in Rome, Brutus and Cassius had been busy in the east. Brutus had gone to Macedonia and Greece, and Cassius had gone to Syria. They were supposed to be governing these provinces, but instead they started raising armies. They extorted money from the local cities, seized the provincial treasuries, and recruited legions. By the time the triumvirate was ready to move against them, Brutus and Cassius had amassed a force of about 19 legions. That's roughly 100,000 men, plus a huge cavalry force and a navy that controlled the eastern Mediterranean. The liberators, that's what Brutus and Cassius called themselves, because of course they did met up in Asia Minor in 42 BCE. They had to decide on a strategy. Should they invade Italy or should they wait for the triumvirate to come to them? Cassius wanted to invade. He argued that they should take the fight to their enemies, catch them off guard, but Brutus disagreed. He pointed out that their supply lines in the east were secure, they controlled the sea, and the longer they waited, the more time they had to train their troops. Most of their legions were new recruits and they needed seasoning. Also, and this is important, if the triumvirate had to march their armies all the way to Greece, it would drain their resources and exhaust their men. Brutus won the argument, so they decided to wait. In Italy, Mark Antony and Octavian were having problems of their own. They had plenty of soldiers, but they were running out of money to pay them. The proscriptions had helped, but not enough. They needed to get to the east where all the wealth was. The problem was that the liberators controlled the sea. The triumvirate managed to get most of their army across the Adriatic, but their supply ships kept getting intercepted. This was going to be a problem. Mark Antony and Octavian led 8 legions into Macedonia, so about 40,000 men, maybe a bit more, with the promise that more would follow. They marched along the Via Egnatia, the main Roman road that connected the Adriatic coast to Byzantium. In September of 42 BCE, they reached the plains near the city of Philippi, and there they found the liberators waiting for them. The The position that Brutus and Cassius had chosen was really good. The city of Philippi sat on a hill to the north. To the south was this big marsh that was basically impassable. Brutus set up his camp to the north on the slopes of the hill with his left flank protected by the city walls. Cassius set up his camp to the south with his right flank protected by the marsh. Between them, they built a fortified line connecting the two camps. It was a defensive masterpiece. The triumvirate would have to attack uphill, and there was no way to flank them. Mark Antony and Octavian set up their own camps about a mile away, facing the liberators. Antony commanded the southern wing opposite Cassius. Octavian commanded the northern wing opposite Brutus, and then they waited and waited and waited. See, Mark Antony wanted to fight, he needed to fight. His supply situation was terrible and it was only getting worse. Every day that passed, more of his soldiers went hungry, but Brutus and Cassius had no reason to attack. They were well supplied, their position was impregnable, and time was on their side. So they just sat there behind their fortifications, watching the triumvirate's army slowly starve. Mark Antony tried everything to provoke them into battle. He marched his troops up and down in front of their lines, hurling insults. He sent skirmishers to harass their outposts. Nothing worked. The liberators wouldn't budge. This went on for weeks. Octavian, by the way, was sick for most of this time. He had some kind of chronic illness, we don't know exactly what, and he spent most of the campaign in his tent, barely able to stand. Mark Antony was essentially in sole command. Finally, Mark Antony came up with a plan. He noticed that the marsh to the south wasn't completely impassable. There were some solid paths through it, hidden by the reeds. If he could secretly build a causeway through the marsh, he could get behind Cassius's fortifications and cut off his supply lines. It was risky, but he was desperate. For 10 days, Mark Antony's men worked in secret, building a hidden causeway through the marsh. They cut down the reeds to hide their work, and they only worked at night so the enemy wouldn't see them. It was exhausting, miserable work, but they got it done. When the causeway was complete, Mark Antony sent a force of several cohorts across it, and they started building fortifications on the other side, behind Cassius's lines. When Cassius realized what had happened, he panicked. His supply lines were now threatened. He had to act fast. He ordered his men to attack Mark Antony's new fortifications, trying to destroy them before they were completed. This was exactly what Mark Antony had been waiting for. As soon as Cassius's troops left their fortifications, Mark Antony ordered a general advance. The first battle of Philippi had begun. It was October 3rd, 42 BCE. Mark Antony's troops surged forward, crashing into Cassius's lines. At the same time, Brutus's troops on the northern end of the line saw what was happening and decided to attack as well, even though Brutus hadn't given the order. They charged down the hill and slammed into Octavian's forces. Octavian's troops, already demoralized by hunger and their commander's illness, broke almost immediately. Brutus's men overran Octavian's camp, killing everyone they found. They thought they had won a great victory. But down south, things were going very differently. Mark Antony's troops had broken through Cassius's fortifications and were now rampaging through his camp. Cassius, watching from a nearby hill, saw his camp being overrun and assumed that all was lost. He didn't know that Brutus had been victorious on the other end of the battlefield. All he could see was his own defeat. In despair, Cassius ordered his slave to kill him. The slave ran him through with a sword. Cassius died believing that the battle was lost. When Brutus learned what had happened, he was devastated. Cassius had been his friend, his co-commander, and the more experienced general of the two. Now Brutus was alone. He took command of Cassius's forces and consolidated his position. The first battle had been a draw, both sides had lost a camp, both sides had taken casualties, but the death of Cassius was a huge blow to the liberators' morale. Brutus now faced a difficult decision. Should he continue the waiting game or should he seek another battle? His officers were divided. Some argued that they should stick to the original plan. Their supply situation was still good and the triumvirate was still starving. Others argued that they needed to win a decisive victory to restore morale after Cassius's death. The soldiers themselves were getting restless. They wanted to avenge their fallen commander. Brutus made the worst possible decision. He tried to compromise. He continued to wait, but he didn't commit to it fully. He let his officers pressure him. He let his soldiers' desire for revenge cloud his judgment. He knew the smart thing to do was to wait, but he didn't have the strength of will to stick to it. This indecision would cost him everything. For about 3 weeks after the first battle, both armies stayed in their camps, licking their wounds. Mark Antony used this time to strengthen his position. He extended his fortifications further south, threatening to completely cut off Brutus's supply lines. Brutus responded by extending his own fortifications, but he was being stretched thin. The pressure was mounting. Finally, on October 23rd, Brutus made his decision. He would offer battle. He marched his entire army out of his fortifications and formed up on the plain, challenging the triumvirate to fight. Mark Antony was more than happy to oblige. He had been waiting for this moment for weeks. Both armies formed up in the traditional Roman battle formation, 3 lines of infantry with cavalry on the wings. Brutus commanded about 70,000 infantry and 17,000 cavalry. Mark Antony and Octavian, who had recovered enough to at least sit on a horse, commanded about 60,000 infantry and 13,000 cavalry. The liberators had the numbers, but Mark Antony had the experience and the desperation. The two armies faced each other across the plain of Philippi. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mark Antony gave the order to advance. The triumvirate's army moved forward in perfect formation, their shields locked, their javelins ready. Brutus's army did the same. When they were about 50 yards apart, both sides hurled their javelins, and then they crashed together with a sound like thunder. The fighting was brutal. This wasn't like the first battle, where one side broke quickly. This time, both armies were committed, and neither was willing to give an inch. The lines pushed back and forth, men dying by the hundreds, but neither side could gain an advantage. On the wings, the cavalry clashed, and again it was a stalemate. This was going to be decided by pure attrition. Slowly, gradually, the triumvirate's troops began to gain the upper hand. Mark Antony's veterans, hardened by years of campaigning, started to push back Brutus's less experienced troops. It wasn't dramatic, just a few feet here, a few feet there, but it was enough. Brutus's lines began to waver, and then somewhere in the center a cohort broke, and then another, and then the whole line began to collapse. Brutus tried to rally his men, riding up and down the line, screaming at them to hold, but it was no use. Once a rout begins, it's almost impossible to stop. His soldiers threw down their weapons and ran. The triumvirate's troops pursued them, cutting them down as they fled. Thousands of men died in the rout. Brutus managed to escape with a few thousand survivors and retreated to the hills. That night, Brutus knew it was over. His army was destroyed. His cause was lost. He had failed. According to the ancient sources, he gathered his closest friends around him and quoted a line from Greek tragedy: "Wretched virtue, you were but a word, and I worshipped you as real, but you were only fortune's slave." Then he convinced one of his friends to hold a sword while he ran himself onto it. Brutus died at the age of 43, 2 years after he had helped murder Julius Caesar. The Battle of Philippi was over. The liberators were dead. The Republic, or what was left of it, was in the hands of the triumvirate. Mark Antony and Octavian divided the Roman world between them. Mark Antony took the east, where all the wealth was. Octavian took the west, which was broke but included Italy and Rome itself. Lepidus got North Africa because apparently somebody had to. For the soldiers who had fought at Philippi, the war was over. Mark Antony and Octavian had promised them land and money if they won, and now they had to deliver. They confiscated land all over Italy and gave it to the veterans. This displaced thousands of Italian farmers who were understandably pretty upset about it, but the triumvirate didn't care. They had an army to pay off. The significance of Philippi can't be overstated. It was the last real chance to save the Republic. If Brutus and Cassius had won, maybe, and this is a big maybe, they could have restored something like the old Republican system. But they lost, and with their defeat, the Republic died. Not officially, not yet, but in practice it was over. Rome would be ruled by strongmen from now on. Of course, Mark Antony and Octavian wouldn't stay friends for long. Within a few years, they would be at each other's throats, fighting yet another civil war. That one would end at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where Octavian would defeat Mark Antony and Cleopatra and become the sole ruler of Rome. He would take the name Augustus and become the first Roman emperor, ruling for over 40 years and transforming Rome from a republic into an empire. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's just sit with what happened at Philippi. 2 battles, 3 weeks apart on the plains of Macedonia, the death of the last Republicans, the revenge of Caesar, and the beginning of the end of the Roman Republic. The ancient sources tell us that after the battle, Mark Antony found Brutus's body and covered it with his own purple cloak as a sign of respect. Octavian, on the other hand, allegedly had Brutus's head cut off and sent back to Rome to be thrown at the feet of Caesar's statue. I don't know if that's true, but it sounds like something Octavian would do. He was always the more ruthless of the two. The battlefield at Philippi is still there, by the way. You can visit it. There's not much to see, just some ruins and a lot of empty fields, but if you stand there and close your eyes, you can almost hear the clash of swords and the screams of dying men. Almost. Like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.